The first time he saw her, she was crouched behind a rotting barrel outside the general store in Daggerbend, a splintery little town leaning into the wind of hard country. Her dress hung like torn parchment over knobby shoulders, dirt smudged beneath her eyes, and something sharp as broken glass glittered behind her stillness. She couldn't have been more than 10. She didn't flinch when the shots rang out across Main Street, but she watched the man who'd fired them. Watched how he held his revolver like it was part of his body, how he turned slow without panic. He noticed her noticing him. "Get up," he said. She stared like a dog that'd been kicked too many times to expect anything else. "I ain't the one you ought to be afraid of," he added. She rose, but it wasn't out of fear. It was the way coyotes rise when the deer starts bleeding. Her name was Mara. He was known only as Vance. Folks called him the gravedigger behind his back, not because he buried people, but because wherever he passed, someone ended up underground. It wasn't murder, not exactly. But men with blood debts or warrants stretching across territories tended to find peace once he'd walked through. He didn't have a reason to take her, not then. Not beyond the silence in her eyes and the feeling that she'd seen something she shouldn't have and wasn't about to speak of it. He bought her a coat, left it beside her without a word, and rode out before nightfall. She followed. 3 days later, he found her curled in the brush outside his campfire, shivering under the coat he'd left. No boots, no food, no words. "You gonna keep trailing me?" he asked. She blinked. "You think I'm safer than whatever you left behind?" She nodded. He could have left her, maybe should have, but something in her quiet cut through him. He was a man who'd long since learned not to ask questions, about where she'd come from, about who she was hiding from. He just gave her a bedroll, a plate of beans, and said, "If you're staying, you earn your keep." She never asked what that meant, she just listened, learned, watched, and she never once asked him for protection. The years folded over like old maps, the trails and blood and smoke drawing lines across them both. Mara grew taller but stayed lean, wiry like a whip. She rarely smiled, but when she did, it was the kind that unsettled strangers. Vance taught her to shoot not out of sentiment, but because out there, if you couldn't hold a gun, you didn't last long. He taught her how to look harmless, how to vanish, how to read the air before a man drew steel. She took it all in like dry wood soaks up rain. By the time she was 16, she rode beside him instead of behind. They never talked about love or family. That kind of talk got people killed or disappointed. But in his own way, Vance promised her something bigger than blood, protection, not through walls but through readiness. He told her the world was teeth and glass and fire. He said the only way to survive was to be sharper than what tried to cut you. Still, he watched the shadows more closely when they passed through certain towns. He knew someone was still hunting her. She never spoke his name. But Vance had seen enough girls broken open to know the shape of a man's cruelty. Whatever had chased her out of Daggerbend, it had left tracks inside her that hadn't faded with time. That summer, they found work guarding a rail shipment from Rook's Bluff to Langspur, a rough path through scorched plains and outlaw country. The job was simple, pay was good, and the man who hired them, a rail baron's son named Heron, had coined to throw at danger. Vance took it because it was clean. Mara took it because clean jobs made dirty men lazy. On the third night, Heron got drunk and cornered her near the wagons. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She waited until he grabbed her wrist, then broke his thumb against the wheel axle. Vance dragged him out into the dark and left him with a split lip and a warning. "You ever touch her again, you won't keep your teeth long enough to apologize." "You think she needs protectin'?" Heron spat blood. "She's feral. You trained her to be like you, cold and mean. No wonder she don't flinch." Vance pulled his coat tight, knuckles twitching. "That girl's the only thing on this earth I still believe in." But Mara had already heard, already walked past him, heading toward the firelight without a word. That night she didn't sleep. She sat up, fingers running slow over the knife at her belt, eyes trained on the horizon like something was finally coming. She'd spent her childhood hiding. She was done hiding. Vance never saw the rider until it was too late. The ambush hit outside of Gildrock Pass, a narrow strip of canyon where the dust choked the air and sound carried strange. One moment the wind was quiet, the next it roared with gunfire and hooves. The rail shipment was a lie, a lure. Someone had paid good money to draw them out. Vance took 2 bullets to the ribs and dropped hard. Myra held the line. She moved like she'd been born for blood, quick, surgical, merciless. Two of the attackers fell before they even realized she'd moved. She dragged Vance behind the wrecked wagon, packed his wounds with rag and whiskey, then covered him with her coat. "You said to be sharper than what cuts you," she whispered. Then she stood and went hunting. By dusk, the canyon floor was silent. Crows began to gather. Vance, half-conscious, watched her walk back through the smoke, her hands red, her eyes flat and empty. "You all right?" he rasped. She looked down at him. "You said you'd protect me," she said, voice raw. "I tried." She knelt beside him. "I know, but it's not your job anymore." He wanted to argue, but the truth was bleeding too fast from his side. He gritted his teeth, pain blooming up through his chest like fire under skin. "You listen to me," he choked. "You don't owe me a goddamn thing." Myra leaned closer. "I don't, but I'm not leaving you." "You'll die." She shook her head. "I'll kill them first." She stitched him up in the cave above the pass, where the wind howled like a woman keening. She fed him broth from her flask, kept the fire low, cleaned his wounds with a gentleness that almost didn't belong in a girl raised on vengeance. He faded in and out, fevered and muttering. She kept watch. She knew who'd sent the men, knew that face, that voice, that cruel-laced laugh she'd heard once behind her in Daggerbend, whispering she was never getting out. He had money, reach, people who owed him silence, and he wanted her back under his thumb or in the dirt. Vance had promised her safety once, but promises could break. She wouldn't. When Vance opened his eyes again, a week had passed. She was still there. Gun across her lap, hair a tangle of soot and sweat, eyes alert. "You should be gone," he rasped. She looked over. "You're not dead." "I might be." She smirked barely. "Then I'll keep you company." And he knew, in that moment, that the girl he'd tried to protect wasn't a girl anymore. She was a weapon, one he'd helped forge. And now she was the one holding the line between him and the grave. The cave held them through the cold nights. Wind scoured the stone mouth like it wanted to peel them out of hiding, but Mara held fast. She didn't speak much, only moved when she needed to, hunting, fetching water, checking the traps she set along the ridge. Each day, Vance saw more of her as she was now, unsentimental, methodical, watching the world as if it owed her a reckoning. He healed slowly. The fever broke, then returned, then broke again. She kept him tethered, spooning broth past cracked lips, changing bandages with blood-stiff fingers. Sometimes he'd wake with her at the mouth of the cave, silhouetted against the firelight, knife balanced on her thigh, and he'd feel a strange mixture of shame and pride. Shame that he'd failed her. Pride that she didn't need him anymore. One morning he found enough strength to sit up. She was gone. Not far, he could tell by the way the fire still smoked, the faint trail in the dust, but gone long enough that the quiet pressed in. He thought of calling for her, then didn't. Instead, he listened. Hooves. Then the sound of a man begging. By the time he dragged himself to the cave's edge, she was already walking back, blood on her sleeve, a fresh pistol tucked in her belt. "What do you find?" "Scout," she said. "Just one, sent ahead." "Yours now." She nodded. Vance leaned back against the stone. His breath shook. He knew who sent him. Her eyes darkened. "He was Daggerbend born," said the name. "Didn't think I'd remember his voice." "And?" "I cut out his tongue before he could lie again." He didn't ask what she did after that. They moved out on the 12th night. Vance couldn't ride yet, but she'd scavenged a mule from the scouts' camp and strapped together a stretcher of wood and canvas to pull behind it. He didn't argue. He knew this part of the land well enough to recognize the slope of the hills and the way the moon tracked west. She was heading back toward Daggerbend. "You sure?" She looked over her shoulder. "You said it once. Only way to end something is to walk straight into it. Didn't mean for you to learn that so well." She gave a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, I did." She drove them hard through the dry country, keeping to the creek beds, sleeping in ravines, moving mostly at night. Vance watched the shape she'd become, leaner, faster, sharper, and wondered if he should have taught her more mercy, or if that would have just gotten her killed. He wasn't sure anymore what a man owed a girl in a world like this. But he knew this. Whatever storm waited in Daggerbend, she wasn't planning to outlast it. She was planning to end it. They reached the town at dusk, 5 days later. Daggerbend hadn't changed. Still a crooked string of buildings folded under dust and rot, still watched over by the same sagging church and the two-level saloon where men with power pretended they had God on their side. But there were more guns now, more riders at the edge of town. Word must have reached ahead. Marrow was coming home. She stashed Vance in a grain shed outside the butcher's yard. It stank of old bone and rat piss, but it was out of sight. She brought him jerky and water, stripped the saddle from the mule, and took the scout's pistol for herself. "I'm going in tonight," she said. He tried to sit up, failed. "Not alone." "You think I ca?" "No, I know you can. That ain't the same as should." She looked at him for a long time, her face unreadable. "You taught me everything I know," she said, "but this part's mine." The saloon was louder than it had any right to be. Whiskey flowed like water, music off-key, men laughing too hard to be sober. That was how he did it, how he kept power. He made noise, bought silence, used gold and rot and fear like levers. Mara stepped through the doors and no one noticed her at first. Just another slip of a girl in trail dust. She walked to the bar, ordered nothing, waited. He came down the stairs a few minutes later, all clean boots and silver buttons. Thorn, that was his name. A name she'd locked away in her head like rusted iron. His beard was trimmed now, hair slicked back, eyes just as mean. He saw her. And froze. "Mara." She didn't move. "Hello, Thorn." "Well, I'll be," he laughed, but it was brittle. "You came back. Little rabbit came back." She didn't laugh. "I heard stories," he went on, voice louder now, trying to drown his own fear. "Girl runs off with a killer, grows up feral, thought you was dead." "I was for a while." The room had gone quiet, chairs scraped, fingers slid toward holsters. Thorn stepped closer, hands spread. "You here to kill me, girl?" She raised her pistol and shot him in the thigh. He collapsed, screaming. The room erupted, but she was already behind the bar, using the counter as cover. 2 men went down before they found her. Another she knifed as he rounded the corner. She moved like breath between ribs, silent, sure, relentless. When the smoke cleared, Thorn was crawling toward the door, bleeding and sobbing. She stepped on his back. "You remember the cellar?" she asked. He froze. "You said I'd never leave it." "Mara, please. You locked me in there when I was 8, for 3 days." He whimpered. "You made me watch. Please, I'll give you money, land, whatever." She shot him in the spine, just once. Left him breathing, paralyzed. "You don't get to beg." By the time she returned to the grain shed, her coat was wet, her eyes blank. Vance looked at her, then at the blood. Did it help? "No," she said, "but now he can't hurt anyone else." He nodded. They didn't speak again that night. In the morning, she burned the saloon. The flames spread fast. No one tried to stop it. Daggerbend didn't scream, it watched, let it happen. As they rode out, her leading, him bundled behind, they didn't look back. The sky behind them smoked red, and still no one came after. The town had seen what she was, what she'd done, and it wanted no part in her story. Vance touched her shoulder. "You saved me." She didn't turn. "You raised me," she said. "That's not the same as owning me." "I know." She rode on, quiet for a time. "You tried to make me safe," she added, "but safety was never mine to have, so I learned how to be dangerous instead." Vance looked at her, at the straight set of her shoulders, at the silence she wore like armor. And he knew she wasn't done. Not yet. They followed the ridgelines north for weeks, cutting across broken country where law didn't reach and names didn't matter. Word traveled slower out here. The wind carried whispers of what she'd done in Daggerbend, how Thorn lay rotting from the inside out, a spine-shattered husk crawling in his own piss, but no one spoke them aloud when she entered a room. They just stepped aside. Mara wasn't running anymore. She was tracking something larger now. Vance watched her from behind the haze of pain and slow healing. She kept him alive the way a soldier tends to a rifle, efficient, focused, precise, but her mind was somewhere else. Her eyes didn't scan for threats, they searched for a path. "Where are we headed?" he asked one night beside a creek, after the fire had died to coals. She didn't answer right away, just sharpened her knife slow, rhythmic. "You remember Josiah Crow?" Vance's jaw tightened. "Yeah. Thought he was dead." "He should be." "Well," she said, "he ain't." She pulled a crumpled letter from her coat, ink smeared, paper stained. "Found this in Thorne's office. Letterhead from Crow's people, talking about shipments, girls, land deeds, like nothing's changed." Vance cursed under his breath. Josiah Crow had been a sheriff once, before he sold half the county to private guns and built himself a kingdom out of debts and missing children. Vance had crossed him years back, when Crow was still pretending to be a man of the law. He thought he'd seen the last of him, but ghosts like that didn't die easy. "You going after him?" She met his eyes. "I'm going to end him." They found Crow's reach long before they found the man himself. It started in an outpost called Stillwater Flats, 2 whores missing, a barkeep who swore he never saw them leave. Mara followed the tracks into the hills and found their bodies face down in a dry wash, throats slit clean. She didn't cry. She buried them herself, stones stacked neat. Then she walked into the saloon and slit the barkeep's belly open across the bar. No one stopped her, no one even stood. "They belong to him," she said loud enough for all to hear. "You fed them to the dogs." She dropped Crow's letter on the counter before she left. Let the town read it. The next day, half the settlement was burned, and no one came looking for the girl who'd lit the match. Vance tried to reason with her. When the fever broke fully and his legs stopped shaking, he saddled up and rode beside her again. He could see the hunger in her now, not for blood, but for justice so old it'd turned to rust in her mouth. The kind that didn't ask for forgiveness, only reckoning. "You keep killin' like this," he said one night, "you won't have nothin' left." She didn't look at him. "Nothing's all I had to begin with." He reached for her shoulder. She stepped away. "I'm not yours to save," she said. "I never said you were, but you're still human." She turned to him then, slow. "I'm what this world made me. You helped me survive it. But this," she gestured toward the trail, the smoke, the miles behind them, "this is mine." He didn't speak after that. It took 2 months to close the distance to Crow. They passed through towns where the man's face still hung in portraits, grinning like some cattle baron saint. Sheriff of prosperity, defender of the old hills, all lies, all part of the story he'd bought with bodies. But Mara knew better. She'd been one of the girls who didn't disappear. She remembered the sound of his boots on the cellar steps, not from Daggerbend, earlier, before Thorne, before she learned how to fight, when she was still a name scrawled on a church ledger beside a mother who never came back. He tried to buy her once, when she was 7. Vance never knew that part. Now she hunted him across the spine of the world. They found Crow in Hypine, a walled town with iron gates and guards in dusters stitched with silver trim. A monument to everything he'd built on the backs of others. He held no badge now, just contracts, private muscle, a governor's favor. They arrived at night, didn't ride in, watched from the trees, counted windows, guard shifts. "I'll go in quiet," she said, "when the gate changes." Vance looked at the town, then at her. "You sure about this?" Her voice was calm. "I've been sure since I found that cellar." "You might not come out." She tied back her hair. "Then you'll know where to bury me." She entered through the stable yard, cutting through the dark like a blade through cloth. 2 guards fell before they even knew she was there. She changed into one of their coats, covered her face with a kerchief, moved through the alleys like a ghost with old debts. Crow lived above the town hall, 3 rooms, 2 guards, 1 private stairwell. She took her time, watched, waited. At 3 in the morning, she climbed the lattice behind the west wall and entered through the kitchen window. Found him asleep, fat and soft now, beard going gray, his gun on the nightstand, untouched. She didn't wake him. She put the muzzle against his temple and cocked the hammer. He jerked awake, saw her eyes froze. "Mara," he whispered, you remember me." Silence. "I remember the smell of that cellar," she said. "The chain, the bucket, the way you looked at us like we were meat." "I never." She pistol-whipped him, once, hard. "You bought Thorn girls like cattle," he told me. "I was supposed to be your favorite." Blood in his teeth, his eyes wide, pleading. "Mara, you've come so far, you've survived. I can help you now. I've got land, I've got influence, you could." She pulled the trigger. Just once. His body twitched, then stilled. She didn't stay to watch him bleed out. By the time Vance saw her again, the town behind her was burning. She walked through the gates as if nothing touched her. He opened his mouth to speak, but she stopped him with a glance. "It's done," she said. And it was. But she didn't smile, didn't weep, just rode. They didn't stop for 3 days. Rode until the mountains turned gold again and the smell of fire was gone from the wind. On the 4th day, Vance caught up beside her and said what had been sitting in him since the first shot fired back in Daggerbend. "You saved me." She didn't answer. "You saved yourself, too." Still no answer. But she slowed her horse, just a little, let him ride beside her. Not because she needed him, but because she chose to. And for the first time in a long while, he felt that was enough. They rode north into country too hard for maps, pines thick as prison bars, rivers black with meltwater. It was quiet land, scarred by old mining camps and half-finished rail tracks rusting beneath moss. Up here, people didn't ask names. They watched for guns and moved on. Mara didn't speak much anymore. Not out of coldness, but because she had nothing left to say. The fire that driven her was spent. Thorn was dead, Crow was ash, but peace wasn't what waited in the silence. Vance saw it in her, that tautness behind the eyes, a kind of restlessness that had nowhere to go. Like she'd climbed out of hell and found the world didn't know what to do with her. He didn't push, just rode beside her, slow and steady, a shadow still healing. They found work on the edge of the Redville timber camps, felling trees, hauling cedar, clearing land for a company that paid in coin and didn't ask for history. The kind of place where men came to disappear. Mara kept to herself, lived in a shack with no windows, woke before dawn, ate alone. She hadn't shot a man in over 3 months. But she hadn't forgiven the world, either. Vance stayed close, but not close enough to smother. He worked too, keeping horses, fixing tack, cleaning rifles for loggers who liked to show off but couldn't shoot straight. He told them Mara was his daughter when they asked. She didn't correct him. Maybe it was easier than explaining what they were, co-survivors, co-bloodied, not kin but something deeper, two pieces that didn't make sense apart. One evening, a storm rolled through the valley, shaking the trees like old bones. Most of the men drank through it, playing cards and yelling over the rain. Mara sat on the porch of the bunkhouse, eyes on the lightning, face unreadable. Vance joined her with a flask, held it out. She took it. "You restless?" he asked. She nodded. "Thought revenged fix it." She didn't answer. "You're still looking," he said. She turned. "For what?" He shrugged. "Don't know, but I see it. In your jaw, in the way you walk like you're halfway to drawing." She passed the flask back. "I thought killing them would make the past shut up," she said. "But it's louder now, like I woke something and now it won't sleep." "That's the truth no one tells you," he said. "Justice don't heal, it just makes the bleeding righteous." She breathed deep, the storm rolled louder. "Then maybe I don't want healing," she said. And he saw it then, clear and sharp, that she wasn't just broken. She was remade, forged. Not to feel better, but to make sure it never happened again. Trouble came in the spring. A body found near the creek, throat slit, boots gone. One of the loggers, a boy no older than 20, new to the camp. Sheriff rode up from Belcross to sniff around. He was fat, red-faced, didn't like the look of Vance, liked Mara even less. Said he was asking questions. She said, "You're asking corpses." That didn't go over well. Next morning, 3 of the sheriff's men tried to take her from the mess hall. She broke one man's wrist, stabbed the second in the thigh, and had a blade to the third's throat before Vance even stood up. She looked at the sheriff. "You want answers," she said. "Look where you buried the girls." He stared at her, stunned. Then she turned and walked out, calm as rain. Later that night, Vance found her sharpening her knife by the woodpile. "You knew." She nodded. The boy was just the first they made a mistake on. Others were quieter. They thought no one would care. "You gonna kill them?" "If I have to." "Then let me help." She looked at him for a long time, eyes unreadable. "You sure?" "No," he said, "but I'm still here, ain't I?" They waited until the camp thinned, until the sheriff rode back to town, until the men responsible were drunk and loose at the fire pit. Mara didn't make speeches. She just walked into the circle and named names. You laid hands on girls who couldn't fight back. The men laughed. Then she dropped a pouch onto the dirt. Inside, buttons, torn lace, a girl's ribbon, things they thought no one would find. The laughter died, and Mara drew her knife. Vance covered the exits, made sure none ran. By the end, 3 men lay bleeding into the soil. And the rest watched, knowing something holy had passed through them. Not a woman, not a girl. A reckoning. They left the camp the next day. Road quiet, no destination, just the road. Vance asked her why keep going. She said because they're everywhere. And he didn't argue, because he knew she was right. Weeks passed, a town here, a name there, stories surfaced. A woman with coal-black eyes hunting men with old sins, a man beside her, quiet, half-limping, always watching. They didn't stay long, just long enough to ask the right questions, to listen. They weren't chasing justice anymore. They were erasing rot. In the desert town of Etna Hollow, they found a child chained behind a church. Mara broke the lock. The priest screamed. She silenced him. Later, as they rode out, the girl asked where they were going. Mara looked back, then forward again. "With us," she said, "you're safer that way." It wasn't a promise, but it was enough. The girl's name was Elsie. She didn't talk much at first, maybe she couldn't. Maybe the silence had been beaten into her like fence posts, driven deep and meant to stay. But she clung to Mara, rode close behind her on the mare, fingers gripped tight to the belt at her waist. Wouldn't sleep unless Mara sat near, wouldn't eat unless Mara handed her the food. Vance watched it all unfold. Watched how Mara, once so closed off the world, could have ended and she wouldn't have blinked, now knelt to tie a child's boot, now taught her how to braid a rope. Her voice had changed, not softer but slower, more patient, like she remembered being small and terrified too. They kept moving, always one town ahead of trouble, not running, just knowing what followed men like them. Mara had stopped pretending she wasn't making a trail. Her name was getting heavier. Each time they burned a church or bled a sheriff, more smoke curled behind them. But she didn't stop. She was raising Elsie the way Vance had raised her, not with lullabies, but with truth. One morning, weeks from Etna Hollow, Mara sat with the girl beneath a bluff of red rock, taught her how to clean a rifle. The girl's hands were small but steady. "You only shoot when you have to," Mara said. "Why?" "Because killing ain't power, surviving is." Vance stood a few feet off, watching the two of them, the slow passing of knowledge like some lost inheritance finally being rewritten. He felt something not in his chest, not grief, not quite pride either. Maybe just that rare thing that lives between endings and beginnings. They reached Cold Mercy in late autumn, a mining town high in the shale hills, its teeth already clenching against winter. Wind blew harder here, hard enough to bite. Mara chose this place, said it was time. "Time for what?" Vance asked. "For roots." He looked around. "You think this town's any cleaner than the last?" "No," she said, "but it hasn't gone bad yet." She bought a plot on the edge of the ridge, just dirt and rock and wind but hers, built a lean-to, then a wall, then another. Vance helped, though his shoulder still ached when he lifted too high. Elsie painted a circle on the door, no meaning to it, just something she liked. People came asking questions about who they were, where they'd come from. Mara never answered. But when a man hit his wife in the street and no one did a thing, Mara followed him home and came back alone. After that, the questions stopped. Winter fell hard. Drifts to the knees, wind that wailed through the eaves, Vance patched boots, Elsie learned to trap hare. Mara built a new room onto the shack, added a chimney, fixed the roof. One night, Vance found her staring into the fire. "You ever think you'll stop?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. "Then I already did." He raised an eyebrow. She looked over at Elsie, asleep beneath a bare pelt. The child's chest rising and falling, peaceful for once. "I'm not hunting anymore," she said. "I'm building, it's different." "You think peace'll let you?" "If it doesn't, I'll carve a place for it." He smiled at that, a rare thing rusty on his face. "You still got that edge. You gave it to me." He poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a tin cup, handed it to her. "To survival," he said. She raised the cup. "No," she said to her. "Spring came late. But it came." The trees budded slow, the river swelled, birds returned. One day Mara found a boy at the edge of the ridge, maybe 12, face bruised, clothes torn, said he'd run from a mine camp, said the foreman kept a chain in the cellar. Mara didn't ask questions. She just opened the door. By midsummer, they were 5. Then 7. Vance built more cots. Elsie taught the youngest to read, mouthing letters slow like spellwork. Mara took the older ones into the hills, showed them how to aim, how to trap, how to know the difference between justice and revenge, and how little that difference mattered when the world refused to care. Some towns sent men to reclaim the runaways. They didn't come back. Rumors spread. A settlement in the hills, a woman with eyes like gunmetal, a man beside her who'd buried half the West, children with knives under their pillows. No name, no sheriff. Only a door. And a circle painted red. Years passed like dust across stone, not fast, not loud, but lasting. Vance grew slower, his hands shook when he tried to sew. One winter he coughed blood and didn't tell her. She found out anyway, sat beside him all night, didn't cry. Just held his hand. "You saved me first," she said. He didn't answer, just squeezed her fingers once before sleep took him. By morning, he was gone. She buried him in the ridge above the house. No marker, just a piece of driftwood with his knife stuck through it. Elsie cried, the others stood in silence. Mara stood longest. The house grew larger. The walls stronger. They raised goats, chickens, grew beans in the shade. Mara taught them how to fight, but also when not to, how to read maps, how to fix wounds, how to be hard without turning hollow. Some called her mother. She didn't stop them. One night when the moon hung full, Elsie came to her. "They say no one comes here unless they're running from something." Mara nodded. "That true for you?" She looked into the fire. "I wasn't running," she said. "I was hunting." "Did you find it?" Mara glanced toward the window, toward the hills, toward the graves and the scars and the children who slept without fear now. "I did," she said. And she smiled, not wide, not bright, but real. In time, they stopped calling her the girl from Daggerbend. Stopped telling stories of the fire and the blood and the men who'd wronged her. They just said, "If you're lost, there's a door in the hills. And if you knock, she'll open it. Not because she has to, but because she can."